Hello, and welcome to a very special edition of the Six Cells podcast on International Women's Day 2022. As it's International Women's Day, I'm going to relinquish my role as the host for the very first time and hand over to Caroline Mastoras, the UK president of Bloom, who will be hosting this podcast. So that's a world first, I think. Not that exciting, but there we go. Before I do pass over to Caroline, though, I wanted to share something with you all. As I was preparing for the podcast today, I wanted to do a little bit of research on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn, as you know, we're on LinkedIn right now, but LinkedIn's got 810 million members globally. I think, Caroline, you said that 52% of the UK population are female. And I wanted to try and get a sense of the female voices, the women voices in our industry on LinkedIn. So I use LinkedIn Sales Navigator to look at people that were C-level, VP or director level that were in marketing and advertising or online media, and then look to see if they posted in the last 30 days. And then I took the first 100 people that came up and looked for male, female. And does anyone want to hazard a guess on how many of the people that had posted were women?
10%.
I was going to say 30.
30. Did you say 10, Ellie?
Yeah, I said 10.
Caroline, I told you yesterday, so you can't guess.
No.
Anyone else?
I'll go for 20.
19.
20%.
20. That's almost perfect. 19 of the 100 people that had posted that I looked at. Obviously, it's not that scientific because I could keep looking and looking till I get to all 810 million. But that's a real shame, I think, because I think that's something that we should definitely discuss today. Because if we, as an industry, Caroline, you say if you can't see it, you can't be it. And if we don't have our women leaders sort of taking a view and sharing their voice sort of out there, then maybe other women won't be empowered by that. But I just wanted to sort of share that as a starter for today, if you like. And with that, Carol, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Mike. And on behalf of Bloom and Nicola and Sue and Hannah and Ellie and myself, I just want to say how much we appreciate you handing over your precious platform for us today. And for us at Bloom, it is super important that we collaborate and work with allies like you to help them and us actually understand the biases that are so common in our industry. We had a great chat about this yesterday. And actually, for me and for Bloom, it is necessary that we work closer with our allies to really drive this change. And I think, to step out of the echo chamber. But before we do kick off today, I just, wanted to say before we celebrate the today's theme of International Women's Day of Breaking the Bias, I just want us to take a moment to focus and reflect on the much needed solidarity of the Ukrainian women and girls currently caught in conflict. And I'm going to have a call to arms here today to ask all of you to take a little bit of action and support the considerable relief efforts actually that are out there on behalf of International Women's Day. But with that, I also want to say that Bloom has always prided itself in focusing on action. And this year, we're going to accelerate that in 2022. So with that, my name is Caroline Mastoras. I am Bloom president for 2022. My side hustle or my real job, I'm a senior account executive at Salesforce. If my boss is on this, that is my real job. And we are going to start today with some super quick 30-second introductions from our most esteemed panel. I am not joking. I am sitting here trying to be so calm and not fangirl, but inside I'm squealing like a 10-year-old girl because I just can't believe I'm here. I just need to pinch myself that this is how we are kicking off International Women's Day, to be in presence of such greatness. So I want to say thank you so much, Nicola, Sue, Hannah, and Ellie, for taking the time out of your crazy busy schedules I know that you have on today to dedicate your time today with Bloom and support Six Cells and this takeover. So without much further ado, shall we do our introductions? And who wants to go first? Nicola, you were on the call first. Why don't you go first?
I'm very happy to go first, Caroline. No worries. So I'm Nicola Wardell, and I'm the MD of the in-house agency here at Specsavers. I join you today from Guernsey, which is where Specsavers' main support office is based, which is a small island in the middle of the sea, for those of you that don't know. I've been with Specsavers for 2 years, having spent 25 years in external creative agencies of varying shapes and sizes. Delighted to join you all on International Women's Day. It's a passion really close to my heart. I'm here because of some amazing women and men that I've met in my career. And I think today's a day about recognising both the women and the men that have given us all the shove up that we need to get us to where we are. So yeah, delighted to be here.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Ellie, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm Ellie Edwards-Scott. Sorry, I'm in a very bright room. I'm trying to adjust my lighting.
Loving the sunshine.
I'm in sunny Beckenham at the moment in a south-facing room. I'm co-founder of the Advisory Collective, which is a digital consultancy that helps businesses land and launch into the UK or to just with their commercial expansion. I'm ex-agency. I did a stint at Group M. I did a stint at Dentsu. I've also been on the other side in the sales side, running ad networks. So I'm really pleased to be here. I'm a champion of women. I am a champion of anyone who encourages women, and I'm really keen to get stuck into a conversation about what we can do to help break the bias. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ellie. And Sue?
Hi, hello, I'm Sue Unerman, and I'm Chief Transformation Officer at Mediacom, joining you from London, which isn't that exotic. And I have written a couple of books about diversity and inclusion with my wonderful co-author, Catherine Jacob, The Glasswall Success Strategies for Women at Work and Businesses That Mean Business. And then more recently, Belonging, which actually looks at diversity, inclusion and equity for all underrepresented groups, because on International Women's Day, it is the day for women. And as you said, women are not in a minority and often get treated as though they are a minority group. But it's important to observe, I think, that many of the barriers that make it inequitable for women and create bias for many women equally create bias for other groups that are underrepresented in senior management. And I think we would all acknowledge that.
Wonderful. Thank you. And if there's something in the sky in London, because I'm also in South London. So for those of you who can't see, all the sunniest. We've got sun streaming into our windows. Thank you very much, Sue. And last and absolutely not least, Hannah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Buitekant. I am Executive Director of Digital within DMG Media, which is essentially Mail Online, Metro, Daily Mail. And incredibly excited to be here today talking about a topic that is obviously of value to everybody, actually every person. And that's really where I'm coming from with regards to change, endorsing change, and in fact, champion of change at DMG Media. And then that's it. I mean, I've worked in media for over 10 years. I haven't seen too much change. That's progressive change, but not sort of a real stigma of change. And I'm really excited for the next 10 years of how much that's going to advance. And people such as ourselves and Sue creating innovation and guidance. We're really at a discovery stage. So it's essentially turning it into a positive, but a huge opportunity for females and future leaders to advance from information shared today.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And now we will kick off with some of the questions. This is going to be a discussion mostly focused around the theme of International Women's Day today, which we all alluded to, which is breaking the bias. For us at Bloom, breaking the bias means calling out inequitable behavior at every turn, and that is, challenging cultural and industry barriers, and the ones that we reinforce in ourselves. But I'm just wondering, what does the theme of breaking the bias mean to you? And is there anyone who would like to go first, or I can pick people, whatever you wish.
I'm happy to jump in first, Caroline. So I think in terms of breaking the bias, we need to recognise that there is bias and recognise that there is bias in all of us. unconscious, subconscious, some is intentional bias, but we have to first recognize that it does exist. Because a lot of people, kind of would like to shrink away from it and actually say, oh, I don't see color, I don't see gender, I don't see inequality, but you have to, because it exists, and you have to recognize it before you can then try and break it or try and do something about it. So I think that's the first thing, recognizing that bias does exist. We all have our privileges. Our industry by its nature is quite a privileged industry, and we need to recognize that. And then we need to look around, whether it be our boardrooms, whether it be our offices, whether it be in the kind of creative work we're producing, and actually say, is this a fair representation of the world around us? And generally it isn't. And then if it isn't, how can we make stepped changes to do something about it? So yeah, I think, I don't drill too much on my point, but I think firstly we need to recognize it and then look upon ourselves to do something, because it doesn't need to be a necessarily huge movement. Everybody can make change, whether it's looking at how you can mentor a more junior member of a team or somebody else's team, whether it's looking at a working parent, male or female, and recognizing after they've come back from having a child that they may be struggling to adjust back into the workplace, whether it's us looking now at a post-COVID return to work and what impact that has on people mentally and physically. The change of coming back into the office 3, 4, 5 days a week when people haven't been doing it, recognizing that actually some of us when we were off during COVID had the space to do different rooms to work in, whereas some of our more junior colleagues didn't. So there's so many areas that you can touch upon and make a change yourself. But I think firstly you need to recognise it.
I think we're going to be in danger of being in radical agreement on this call. But I'd love to endorse what Ellie said, but also to mention the wonderful, inspirational June Sarpong and her mantra, check your circle, which is that if everybody in your circle, and I think this is true both personally and professionally, looks and is the same as you, then I think that's an issue. And one of the things I think in particular for our industry is that we have talked a lot about cultural fit. And the thing about cultural fit is that means if you don't fit, if you're an introvert, it could be when everyone is extrovert. If you are more sober when everybody else loves to go and have a big drink, which is still around in our business, that you're faced often with the choice, I think still to this day, of pretending that you fit in and sort of faking it, or feeling as though you're left out and you're excluded. And we're very much a people business, and so that can be an issue. We've got stats. So our book Belonging was published a couple of years ago, but the paperback's coming out, and we've got new research on our industry in terms of bias, harassment, and inappropriate behaviour at work. And to be honest, it's quite shocking, and I don't want to bring people down actually, but for me anyway, the fact that overall in the UK 1 in 3 people have experienced it, but in our industry it's actually reached 2 in 3 for the last wave of the research, which was the end of last year, which is up significantly from the first wave of the research, which was a couple of years previously. And this is despite the fact that there's been so much remote working. So I do think we have to be really clear about bias, and that again, it's not just one form of bias. It's not just sexism. It's not just, I'm not sure that people with disability could manage to do this job. It's not just sexuality. It's not just age. There's a whole variety of things, and we will get the best out of people in our industry, of which I'm very proud, if those people don't have to fit a mold, but can feel that they are belonged and that they're welcomed and they're valued with their differences.
I think for us, we're all going to be in violent agreement around this one, aren't we, Sue? But for me, the breaking the bias, this is just awareness, isn't it? It's such an awareness driver of there is bias everywhere we look. We're all guilty of it. This isn't an other thing. And it's making ourselves aware of our everyday actions and thoughts that could be bias that when we're just not aware of. But I've got a real passion point about bias towards the men that support us as women getting there. I've got another half who gave up his career so I could have mine, and the bias he had trying to get back into the workforce. So to Ellie's point, this isn't just a bias about women, it's about the biases that exist in our whole ecosystem as human beings, and that's what a day like today I think should be flushing out. I'm a big fan of flushing out issues rather than tiptoeing around them, so let's flush out all those issues and have some straight conversations around them.
Yeah, I hear you, Nicola. I a similar sort of setup within my own personal life, but so for me I just sort of like conclude on that it's about like removing the stereotypes and stereotypical ideas. It's a combat that I have every day, and my husband had as well, from a very different angle. And I think that it's a lackluster of individuals asking questions. It's an ignorance and a concern around us saying something wrong, and that's not right. You need to be able to ask questions. You need to remove preemptive judgment, and I think all of that sort of is encompassing of not putting people in boxes, not preemptively putting people in boxes. And I think Ellie, you said it, the unconscious bias that occurs every day because of those connotations. So for me, that the theme of breaking the bias is pretty much removing the stereotypical way that people have been profiled today.
I love what we're all talking about with allies. And again, we're very clear at Bloom about stepping outside of the echo chamber, but what do you think maybe would be the most achievable goal in breaking the bias, or what do you think would have the greatest impact? There's like amazing ideas here about acknowledging, recognizing, checking your circle. But what actions do you think that we could maybe make as an industry that would have the greatest impact to break that bias? And there might be things that are already happening that you would like to recognize.
I mean, I could probably go first on that, just like sort of taking this from the previous question of it's really like achievable goals are asking questions, it's being forthcoming, it's challenging actually things that you really don't know. I think individuals can shy away from uncomfortable information, and especially if they don't know then how to act upon that. But that's really the charge of change. That's how you can create innovation and collective knowledge, and collectively lean in on topics to evangelize them. I struggle with negative connotations around traditionalist or traditional languages, not the actual speaking languages, but just like, a reference to a housewife, a reference to a house husband. It doesn't make you feel good necessarily. It's almost a negative connotation, or deemed to be a lesser individual, and it's not correct. And so for me, I think achievable goals are just thinking about how you're sort of segmenting a tick box, which I also can't bear, of why do you have to label your age, your gender? Why do you have to do that in this current day? What does it mean? And they're the questions that you need to be asking. I would like more individuals to be asking, which for me, again, remove those presumptuous behaviours around. It happens to me a lot, actually. Like, should I go on a work trip? Should I be asked to go on a work trip abroad? Would it impact my we have children. We don't want to put her in an uncomfortable situation. Like, those behaviours need to be eradicated. It's the same question for everybody. Everybody have a different response. That challenges us. It creates charge of change. So achievable goals. Ask questions.
Love that.
Traditionalism. Remove presumptive behaviours. They're things for me that I'm really seeing happen in a workplace. And even in everyday life, to help us grow as individuals.
Can I just jump in there really quickly? I think that's a really interesting point that Hannah makes there. As a manager before, I've actually done that, where there was a woman in my team that had kids at home. She liked to, she had a certain work routine because of that, and that was fine. And we didn't ask her to travel too much abroad because of that. Now, we thought we were being kind and considerate, and we thought that was a nice thing, rather than, whereas other people in the team might have been asked to go into their territories, into Germany or France or Netherlands or whatever more often, we were saying, well, that's not really fair on her because she's got a young family. But Bahan, you're saying everybody should be asked the question, and then they should have the space to
definitely. She probably could have done with a break, to be honest. The work trip might have been
It would have been enviable, yeah.
I mean, you can't assume things, right? And
No,
you know, that's
no.
where empathy versus sympathy comes in. So my favorite way of explaining the difference between sympathy and empathy is that sympathy is when you sort of go, how would I feel if I was that person, which is, I think, a bit of what you're talking about. And when, you know, if you have a much loved cat, if your cat really, really loves you, then it brings you the very best present it can think of, which is a half dead bird. Right? that's sympathy, whereas empathy is really listening and understanding. And as my wonderful mentor and boss, Karen Blackett, always says, two ears, one mouth, use them in that order. But the other thing that I would stress over and over again, because you're so right in saying this, is that we are all on a journey. None of us are perfect all of the time. We all make mistakes. And if we are in a situation where you can't acknowledge that maybe you didn't get everything right, if you can't acknowledge that you, as I think, Mike, you've just done, you said maybe you did something that you didn't get right. If that just gets you condemned or you know, cancelled, then nothing changes. So I think that's the other thing that I would say. I loved what you said about getting things out into the open and you know, not holding on to things because you're frightened to confront people. And I think that's that sense that you know, we can help each other and that we can be honest about where we've made mistakes and you know, unintentionally. If we don't do that, I'm not answering the question really, because your question was what should we do? But what I know won't work is if we don't get to that situation in work, then things won't change.
I think it's back to the awareness point, and the more that this is flushed out and talked about, but that if this becomes a conversation we're all comfortable having, and we allow our teams to feel comfortable having, that's psychological safety, isn't it? So if there's one goal I think we can nudge towards, is to give people a psychological safety in having this conversation, so they can do what you've done, Mike, and go, do you know what, I got something wrong here. Well, that's fine, because you're not, to Sue's point, going to be shot down for this. But to me, that feels like an achievable goal, but we will only get there by having conversations like this that are honest and a bit raw.
And I think, moving on past the conversation, I think the conversation is good to have, and the conversation, you know, it's good that we're now having those conversations. I've been in the media industry 20 plus years, and we never used to have these conversations. You know, everyone was the same, and if you were a little bit different, you kind of try to blend in. And to what you said earlier, Sue, about that cultural fit, there was a culture and you either fitted into it or tried to fit into it or didn't, and that was it. So I think the conversations are one thing, but actually we do now need to have tangible steps to say, actually, how are we going to make a difference? If your senior leadership is all white male or all white, how do we make a difference? And how are we looking at who's coming through the ranks, and how we can, whether people need improved training, whether people need mentoring, how we get people to the next level? Because as I say, it's not changing quickly enough, I don't think. I still look at campaign every week and I see the movers and shakers, and there are very few movers and shakers of colour. However, I'm a member of Media for All. There are so many senior Black and brown people within the industry. So, you know, why are they not being profiled in the way that other people are? Because, you know, it used to be said, oh, there isn't enough talent out there. There actually is quite a lot of good talent out there. And if we want to encourage more talent into the industry, you know, we need to make sure that they look around the room and actually see people that look like them. When I've been on exec boards, I have been the only person that looks like me in the room. And that's not, you know, I'm quite an outgoing, extroverted personality. So yes, I can deal with it, but it's still, it's not always comfortable, and you're not always able to speak up or think that you can speak up because not everyone looks like you. So we need to actually do more and hire more diverse talent. And it's not just, racially diverse, as you touched upon earlier, Stu. It's, look at ageism in our industry as well. That's an issue. Look at what we're doing to encourage more, people with disabilities into our industry. So there's a whole step change that needs to happen.
And to that point, Ellie, it's about us and as an industry walking the walk. I think we shout a lot about diversity and inclusion and belonging, but by walking the walk, and I think that it's great you mentioned that in campaign, because I notice that all the time. And that was one of the first things that I said to Mike for this podcast. I'm like, you can't be what you can't see. And, as a woman in the industry for almost 20 years, like I remember looking back when I first joined the industry thinking, God, I've got to come up with an exit plan by the time I'm 40, because there's no women over 40 in the industry. And where are they all? And I think that's slowly changing. And I think, some of the conversations, like one of our biggest allyship groups that we have at Bloom is our Empower, which is, owning the conversation around menopause. But, it's sort of had to come up with us rather than, us see it. Sorry, Nicola, you had something to add.
No, it was the ageism point, and the you can't be what you can't see. I was again violently agreeing with you there. I think you I got to 46 and looked around Dadland and went, there's literally, I was in about 2007. Our founder, Dana Perkins, is 7 inches out there campaign.
That's really interesting. I was actually talking to someone, a doctor, the other day, and she was saying in the medical profession, the one thing that they know you can't train people in is experience. So literally, that's the one thing that obviously literally takes time. So, and I think I do think it's true of our industry as well, which is that I'm sure none of us on this call ever have any bad meetings with clients or media owners or media agencies or anything like that. But the point is that the first time you do it, you don't know how to deal with it. The second time you're learning a bit. By the time you've been through a difficult conversation 12 times, then you've just got more resource and also kind of more just more experience to draw on. And I've been I'm older than everybody. I've been in this industry since the 80s, and the expression "it was acceptable in the 80s," no, it wasn't. We have come a long way in media agencies, and I think Mediacom's culture is known for being one that is inclusive, but that in some ways the thing is, and maybe I'd like to ask everybody, am I allowed to ask a question? I'd like to ask everybody this question, because somebody said this to me the other day. She said, I do feel as though that people are biased against me, but they are, this was not any of our organisations, a separate organisation, but in our industry. She said, I do feel people are biased against me, but they are so careful now in what they say and how they behave that it almost is more difficult for me to navigate than it was when it was out there. Now, we don't want to go back to that, and you certainly don't want to listen to me and telling war tales from the first couple 2-3 years of my career, because they're not pretty and they're not funny. But obviously we don't want to go back to that. But I wonder if people think, if the panel thinks, what do you think about that issue?
That people are so guarded that it's difficult to tell if where the bias is coming from now. Is that the question? Yeah. I think it goes back to what quite a few of you have said about having an open conversation. I think there's so many people that are afraid to say the wrong thing, so they say nothing, and then they become guarded, and they're very careful about how they speak, and the opposite is needed probably. I think was it Nick? Was it you that said psychological safety? I think having a place where people can say, "Look, I don't know actually how I'm supposed to behave in this instance. I know what I think, but I don't know what's acceptable, and I need to have a conversation with someone about it." I think it needs to be a lot more open.
And that comes full circle, Sue, to what you were saying earlier about empathy, and to really get to that nirvana of empathy, it is having that conversation, and it is asking those questions. And I love that differentiator between sympathy and empathy, because a lot of the time I see a lot of sympathy in every day, and masked as empathy. But actually, you've made that really clear, and I feel like that if we can get to that incredible point of empathy, then a lot of those barriers will be broken down. But sorry, Ellie, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was listening and thinking, am I surprised by that? I don't know. I think it almost, some companies and some people, have, as we've said, we're now having these conversations, which are great, but some people are still uncomfortable having those conversations. So will do whatever they can to avoid those conversations and almost ignore the fact that there is an issue, especially, and unfortunately some of those people are the people that can actually make those changes within their companies or organizations, because they are at a senior level, and they may be palm it off to HR or to D&I to deal with, as is it's an other problem, and actually it's not, it's everybody's problem. So it's sad to hear, but I'm not that surprised, to be honest. So we've got into stunned silence now.
I know. I feel like there's so much more that I can say on the topic. But yeah, it is interesting. But looking back on, I think walking the walk, talking the talk, and expressing that empathy and leading by example is something that is not only up to us as women, but like to Nicola, your point, it's all of us and our allies as well. How do we then engage men in this conversation? We've talked a lot about engaging men in the conversation. Now at Bloom, we have one of the largest co-mentoring schemes as well, where senior women in the industry and senior men in the industry co-mentor each other, particularly around topics of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. But, that is, in the grand scheme of things, a small program. We do our best, but that is a very small program. But how do we engage men in this conversation to really affect that change?
I mean, it depends on the man, quite frankly, doesn't it? And there's a spectrum of evolution here we're talking about. But it's like any persuasive argument, isn't it? It's the combination of rational and emotional. Rationally, businesses are more successful if they have a good balance of gender at the top. Emotionally, all men have got women in their orbit outside of work, and how would they feel if a daughter or a wife or a sister was experiencing bias in potentially the way that they're showing it? So I think it's a combination of both, but I think that's a massive spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we shouldn't be stereotyping men as men, because they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. But I was just going to say, one of the things that happened frequently. So when Catherine and I were giving talks for the Glass Wall book, and we gave about 150 talks, and mostly the rooms, because they were real rooms, were full of women, because it would be for occasions like International Women's Day or the fast track leaders. But there might be one or two senior men there, and it was not uncommon for a man to stand up and say, "I'd like to ask a question. I've got a daughter now, and she's 4 years old, and I'm very, very keen that she doesn't experience this bias when she enters the workplace. What do you suggest that I do?" And our initial reaction was to think exactly as you've said. Okay, okay, you've got a daughter, that's fantastic, congratulations, but you also have, presumably the daughter has a mother, you have perhaps a sister, you have friends who are women, you have colleagues that are women. How is this something that you're only thinking about now? And of course the answer also being, to misquote Arthur Miller, they are all your daughters, in the sense that, you know, they are all your sons. It's kind of everybody is related and interrelated, and I, you know, I'm very pleased that you've got this instinct now because you've become a father, but you know, it really shouldn't be the only time that you're thinking about it. I mean, I suppose on the other hand, on a pragmatic level, reaching new fathers of daughters could be the moment. I mean, if we want to be very pragmatic about it.
You raised a really good point, though, Sue. I think in terms of, you know, just in terms of why we're not further forward with these conversations or with actions, it's because of the impact. If you look at the people that it has impact on, then actually, if it doesn't have impact on you as an individual, then what is the motivation to make change? So, you know, I'm sure there is so many well-meaning people within the industry, and, you know, people do say, yeah, we need to do more to drive diversity within our organisation, but then go back to their day-to-day job. And actually, because they're not negatively impacted by it, it doesn't become an issue. So that's it. So it's how do we include, you know, or get men to be better allies?
And again, some men, because you know, I have been championed by men in my career, absolutely and fundamentally. I would not have the career that I have.
And by the same token, not all women are champions of women. So I've also, you know, so we can't make that blanket statement either that all women are helping other women, because I've had experiences where some women haven't been as helpful because they've been so glad probably to be in that room or be at that table where we're just like grateful and like, right, that's it. So, you know, it's again, you can't make those blanket statements.
Hannah, did you have anything to add to this? I could see you nodding along, and yes, there is violent agreement as always, but I would love your perspective.
I mean, it's hard. You have sort of like two ways of it. I hear you, the fathers of daughters who are actively seeing the impact that could be in their daughter's world for here and for the future. But to Ellie's point, if they then nothing sort of changes for them, they really don't make any active change, they probably can feel it, but when they go to the day, say in an environment when they can be the person who can actively endorse change for the better good of their daughters and their daughters, etc., and everything else that we talked about, nothing happens. And so it becomes a challenging, because in my response to this, it would be like, you know, how do we encourage men into the conversations? We don't see them as men. They're human beings. They have their own life. They're individuals. They you know, their own cultural challenges, their own way they cook dinner, they go home every night, their own routine, everything as an individual. Treat them as such and ask them the same questions and involve them into the conversation, and expect them to have differing opinions as any individual would. And I think when you're doing that, you sort of essentially treat all things equal. And if you do that, everything has to be equal, from like an equilibrium at the very beginning, which removes the stigma. And this is where I sort of go into my sort of like my push-pull, like, well, that's great, Han, but actually when they go back to their desk and nothing impacts them, then you're back to the same old. And so how do you really encourage that? And I'm not sure how to answer that question. How do you address the, let me put it in a different, I had a brief conversation with somebody the other day. It was a funny anomaly whereby I am one of the only females in a board group. And we're walking down the corridor, and as you know, ladies first, so up I am at the very front. And funny enough, that's sort of essentially a female leading the way, right? We've got a following behind you. We get to the door of this corridor, and somebody ushers in front of me to open the door. And I was like, no, I've got this. And we were stuck. We're stuck in this corridor of who opens the door now? Is it the point of being charming and a gentleman and taking that charge and seeing it through as polite and well-mannered? Or is it like, no, I've got this delicate lady, come on through. And again, it's this push-pull. And so I'm not sure on how to answer this. I have 2 sons, and I will bring them up with well-mannered behaviour, but with respect and an understanding and a good foundation is that all things are equal. And I think, so I don't know how to answer this, and I'm going somewhat in circles, and I'm struggling with my own push-pull here.
No,
but
I think that's a great question. Who opens the door?
who opens the door?
I'll tell you who opens the door. The people in the boardroom open the door to bring some other people in. That's who opens the door.
It's
I know
really-
I'm talking about a different door, but I think, so much of the
the answer.
narrative and, Mike, it even struck me, the senior voices in our industry, out of 100, only 19 were women that posted. And it's kind of like, well, come on, women, we must post more. Well, or maybe the LinkedIn algorithm could do a bit of zhuzhing up of women to actually have a balance of 50-50, because it is algorithmically based. And I think too much of the onus on diversity and inclusion has rested with the people who are outside that inner circle to date. And that's something that as leaders within the industry, we must shift.
Yeah.
Just to say on the LinkedIn thing, it was looking at all users. It wasn't an algorithm thing. It was looking at, I just looked at the first 100 people that were in the filters that I'd asked for. So C-suite, VP, director, marketing, advertising, and then just counted the first 100 and then looked to see, whether they were male or female. We've got a question here for Sue. Is it all right if I just jump in? I know I've handed over to you, Caroline, but I feel like I'm jumping back in again. So the research that you spoke about earlier, Sue, did the research find out why bias is up year on year? So I think you talked about 1 in 3 women in a previous round of research had said that they'd felt bias, and it's now up to 2 in 3. Do you know what factors had contributed towards this?
So it's people. It's not women. So it isn't just women. And in fact, when you dig into the research as a whole, so nationally, the figures are stark for underrepresented groups. So if it's 1 in 3 people overall, it's half of those under 25. It's 59% of new mums. It's 62% of people who are disabled. It's 70% of the neurodiverse, 45% of people who are assigned as mixed race. So it's not just women. In fact, it's lots of underrepresented groups, as I said. These are quant figures. So this is quant research. So there wasn't a qualitative aspect to it. But I would talk about the time to research that NABS have done with Helen Colecraft, where their study from last year talks about fear amongst women of a pent-up demand almost for harassment. So 42% of women are fearing that when they go back into the workplace, it will actually become worse. So I don't know. I think we could all speculate on why those figures have gone up, and it may be something to do with the nature of Zoom calls and Teams calls, and some people feel as though they don't get their voice heard, and it may be this sense that the phrase pent-up demand actually comes from Helen, I think, and it's an interesting expression. It's this sense that there is something in our industry that just is systemic, and that does grieve me. I think almost like people in a zoo, it's very difficult to be aware of what normal would be like when we've all grown up with things as they are, with the status quo. And I don't know if you saw, I'm slightly changing the subject, but I don't know if you saw the tweet that went around yesterday, which is about a planning permission for a plaque on Bristol Cathedral to celebrate the first women to be ordained into the Church of England. And they're replacing the plaque. And the reason that they're replacing the plaque is that the original plaque didn't mention any of the women who were ordained. Instead, it mentioned the men that ordained them. And the new plaque actually has, it's going to be slightly bigger, and it's going to include, and it's
Which
that
Nicholas,
kind of
Nicholas
thing. I mean,
for those of you who can't see, jaw is literally on the floor.
Wow, that's really something, isn't it?
So I think we need to, and look, I hope that our going back into the workplace is going to allow us to properly have a reset and not back to how it was, because back to how it was, as you said, Ellie, so eloquently, is not enough change.
Well, that will lead me to, I think, one of the final questions I've got, really. And, you know, one of the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning and you look at your phone, and someone from the UN tweeted, according to the UN, we are 108 years away from equal pay. So 2130. I would personally love to see that in our lifetime. I think we owe it to the industry. We owe it to our women. Our allies need to get on board with that very real change. And that is what a bias-free world might look like to me, equal pay for everyone for doing the job. But what is your vision for what a bias-free world might look like? Big, heavy question, but what do you think that might look like? What are your wishes? Put them out there. Let's manifest them.
Okay. For me, everyone should feel safe to bring their real selves to work. Everyone should feel that they belong in the workplace. Everyone should know that success in their organisation is based on how they can contribute, not on who they are or who they have to pretend to be. And a workplace where everyone feels safe enough to challenge and to express their opinions.
I echo a lot of what Sue said. I think in terms of, you know, being the ability to be your authentic self is so important. The ability to walk into a room, no matter which industry we're in, and where our industry, you know, where we're focused is kind of London and the Southeast, and you know, we are such a diverse population, and our industry should reflect that. You know, I've got a son, I've got a daughter, and I want them, no matter what industry they go into, to not be one of the only ones, because as soon as you are like that, you feel on a bit of a back foot, and I don't want them to have that. I want them to be able to be authentic and do any career that, you know, that they like to, and actually see people who look like them and not who are like them. Equal pay, 108 years. I was trying to find the stat this morning actually and couldn't, but for women of colour, that it's even longer in terms of equal pay. So, you know, just being recognised and truly rewarded. I think everyone deserves to be truly recognised and truly rewarded for the contributions that they make, and that's not the case now. And that it would like to think that in the future, no matter what you look or sound like, that you are recognised for the contributions that you make, and given the opportunity to be part of those discussions.
I'd be really specific in my answer to that question, I think, because I obviously echo everything that Sue and Ellie have said, but specifically to women and you know, what would I really hope for? I think there are two junctures in your career as a woman where it can get a bit sticky, and you suddenly start to feel this delta between you and your male peers. That's when you have your first child. And that's when you then hit the midlife crap, as I like to call it, which is either ill health of you, ill health of your parents, siblings, whatever, and all of that piled onto it. And I think both of those junctures are really precarious for women. And it goes back to Sue's point about being able to just be who you are as you go through those journeys, and not feel that you have to pretend that something isn't happening. Be comfortable in being able to bring that to the table and feel that you're not being judged. And I think if we can iron out those two, whatever we want to call them, potentials to fracture your professional career, almost, those two stages of a woman's life, then we will be making huge headway.
Yeah, I mean, everything everyone said, but Nicola, really the angle I was going with of reevaluate like reproductive rights. It's for all actually now. Every, like, you know, to a degree, can have children and actually bear children. That's the key, right? It's there's a gender who conceive and carry the child, and if it really is fractious at that point. It changes everything. It changes everything overnight. There's not enough done to support that as individuals who, whether it's, you know, whatever their focus in life is, if you're like, everybody's ambitious to their own, like, I suppose, varying degrees and levels, but it changes everything overnight, and are not supported, and somewhat seen to be, and in some environments could be seen to be selfish because they've made a personal decision to have a child. And actually the rights that are endorsed by the government today as well, with statutory pay or paternity, parental pay, parental leave, is still quite stagnant. It doesn't give you opportunities to be your authentic self and say, hey, I can have a child and work simultaneously. I don't have to have a minimum maternity or paternity or parental leave. I can do everything, because we do everything, and it's different to every individual person. And I think if we're given that opportunity, anybody is given that opportunity to be more tailored to individualism and their authentic self, and reevaluate and give the opportunities, we see a really, really kind of a future that I can't even perceive, but just something that's kind of almost unrecognizable to the current day. And for me, that would be a huge, huge change for the world.
Amazing. And we need to go back to what you said earlier, Hannah, and put those goals in, really. And I think there have to be some tangible goals, so actually we can see that future and what it looks like to then make steps to get there. Now, we have a couple of questions from my amazing CSO, Samantha Sanfrankel from Bloom, has just asked in the chat, incredible, but sadly not surprising. It's just that it's not just in our industry, but in our culture. Our young children exhibit incredible gender bias. How can we counteract that?
Gender bias in children is really interesting. As I say, I've got a son and a daughter. My son's 3 years older than my daughter, and you know, when he was young, he was never allowed to. He never had a toy gun. He never had a toy knife. I just didn't agree with it. And people would say to me, "Why, you know, little boys play with knives and guns?" And I'm like, he's a little black boy going to go into a black man. Why would I have him playing with guns and knives and thinking that's absolutely fine? Because what's cute when he's a baby isn't cute as an adult. And I just, you know, you'd look at clothing and you'd have, and I'd be very careful in kind of terms of the colours that I dressed him in, and make sure he wasn't always in, you know, greens and browns, or he'd have a top which would be army camouflage. You know, it's weird from even the way that the toy stores are set up. You've got girls' toys, you've got boys' toys, you've got, you know, pinks for the girls, and you've got dark colours for the boys, and it's just, as a parent, you have to fight against it from such an early age to say, actually, I'm going to ensure that, you know, if I've got one of each, that they do the same things or similar things, or if you've just got one gender, that actually you don't force them into those roles by having your girl play with an ironing board and play with a baby and push her buggy, which she does think is cute, but it's saying, you know, little girl, you're going to be a mother when you're older, which she might want to be, she might not want to be. And it's weird how, you know, and media and advertising, we're responsible for a lot of this. There's a lot of hidden messages within advertising, isn't there, in terms of these are roles, you know, the mum's in the kitchen cooking, dad's relaxing on the sofa, things like that. And it's hard to break, but I say, for my husband and I, we just try and make it, you know, as easy as possible, and ensure that my daughter feels that she's got the opportunities that my son has, because a lot of the time within school, the boys just have that sense of entitlement and the girls kind of strive to be. So I don't know what the answer is, but as parents and as aunts and as uncles, and we've all got an opportunity to actually try and change those stereotypes, and it's important.
walking the walk, isn't it? And our very individual behaviours in the home as well as outside of the home. I remember being in an early learning centre when my daughter was about 6 months old, and of course I'd never been in one, because you would never go in one, would you, when you didn't have children? And literally, my husband was so embarrassed, being so vocal, seething when I saw these toy hoovers and toy ironing boards, and I was like, "What? Why do they even exist? Why would anyone want to play ironing?" So, and I still can't work the Hoover in our house. It's a standing job. Every time I move it, I break it. So I think I'm probably sending quite a good signal to my child that she doesn't have to be a domestic goddess to have a good life. But yeah, I think it's about our individual behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm genuinely really sorry to jump in, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Absolutely. I was just going to say there's no other questions. And Mike, I just wanted to thank you and Sixcells so much once again for letting us have this platform. Nicola, Sue, Hannah, Ellie, like, I'm still screaming and fangirling inside. I'm trying to be really calm through it, but I just want to thank you so much for your time on this important day. The main message I've taken out from today is empathy, listen and understand, recognize that there is a bias, check your circle. Biases exist throughout the entire ecosystem, but really, ask, show empathy, and ultimately, if we need to give a rational business case that you are more successful as a business if you have more diversity and gender balance at the top. And who will open that door? I'm gonna open that to everyone else. But thank you once again, Mike, and thank you so much. What an amazing day to kick off International Women's Day.
Thank you, Caroline. I've quite enjoyed being a guest. So maybe if you could just be the from now on, that'd be amazing.
Oh my God, I'm sure.
Fun when you can listen to the conversation properly and not think, what am I supposed to be asking next? Thank you, everyone, very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.